In this segment of the tutorials, we'll look at the first half of the main solo and take a look at a couple more exercises that help us break down some of the more technical parts in this section. But let's have a play through this section just before we get started. So the first few bars of this main solo section begin with a few short phrases that offer plenty of space for some really nice articulation, and if you want, also the opportunity to add some of your own style and your own flavour to the part. Now here you'll notice that there's more emphasis on sliding in and out of phrases, as I mentioned in the last segment, and you'll also find a good healthy amount of vibrato on all the sustain notes. Again, with these slides, like in the previous section, don't be afraid to really emphasise and exaggerate them, and the same also applies to the vibrato. Now, another feature in this section that's quite subtle but still important for the overall feel are the semiquaver dead notes before each phrase. Now, although these might seem a little unimportant, they actually serve two functional purposes. Now, one is to add a sense of momentum going into each phrase, and the other is to actually reinforce the dead notes that occur in the rhythm guitar part that also align with the rhythms that are played in the bass and the drums. So what this does is it gives all the parts a real strong sense of rhythmic unity. So really try locking into this rhythm and working on these dead notes, make sure that they're nice and clear. And once you do, you'll actually find that it feels more natural this way. So then we come to the first real technical challenge of the main solo section. And it's an ascending run of 16th notes over an F minor 9 arpeggio. Now, the 16th notes by themselves might not seem that difficult, but what makes this run a little bit trickier and a bit more interesting is the string skipping that's involved. So we start the arpeggio by double picking each note from the 10th fret on the 5th string, followed by the 12th fret on the 4th string, then to the 13th fret back on the 5th string, then skipping the 4th string and jumping to the 10th fret on the 3rd string, and back down to the 12th fret on the 4th string. Then this time skipping the 3rd string and jumping to the 10th fret on the 2nd string. Then back to the 12th fret on the 3rd string. Then that's followed by the last skip up to the 10th fret on the 1st string. And then back again, this time to the 11th fret on the 2nd string. Then we move completely to the 1st string for the last few notes, starting with the 13th fret, then the 10th fret, then a big jump up to the 17th fret, then finishing off with the 13th, and then the 15th. So altogether that's and then at full speed, so before I started recording this track, I actually created an exercise to help me nail this lick, and you can find this in exercise 3 of the additional exercises folder. So once you've got that open, you'll see that it's actually based on the exact same pattern, except in the exercise it doubles back on itself with the addition of then a straightforward run through the arpeggio, just to help you get used to double picking by itself. So it ends up being a nice circular exercise loop that you can pretty much keep repeating over and over until your right hand gets tired. Now when I'm playing it, what I'll do is I'll tend to do repetitions of either 2 or 4 and then rest before starting the whole thing again. So let's play through the exercise and hear how it sounds in full. So one of the key things to this exercise, and the lick in the song in general, is making sure that you use the right picking angle to gain enough clearance from the strings on your upstrokes. You see, as we're double picking each note, we're forced to use an alternate picking pattern, which means every other note lands on an upstroke. So if we use a downward picking angle, we'll break clear of the string on each upstroke and then have a clear line to the next string, which is exactly what we need when we're changing strings on every other pick stroke. So to get a downward picking angle, you'll want to tilt the rounded edge of the pick towards the floor. That is to say, the edge of the pick that's opposite to the pointed side of the pick. And at the same time as that kind of tilt, you might also want to tilt the pick on a different axis, so you end up picking more with the side edge rather than the flat part of the pick. This is usually referred to as edge picking, but most players will probably find that they do this naturally anyway. So together you end up with a picking angle that looks like a downward pick slant and then a slant towards the edge. So once you do get this picking angle sorted, also remember that with this exercise you want to start off slow and build up speed gradually. You don't want to go straight in. Perhaps even start off a half speed or quavers rather than semi-quavers, and then build gradually from there. But once you do get the exercise down, you'll actually find it's a great way of maintaining your overall picking technique. So then, following straight on from that comes a short and tricky but actually really fun series of notes based on an A-flat major arpeggio, which then flows into a flurry of semitone bends and legato slurs. So let's have a listen to this section now. So to tackle the first part of this phrase, we're going to look at exercise 4 from your additional exercises folder. Now you'll see this exercise deals only with the A-flat arpeggio part of this phrase. Now this is due to the fact that we use an economy picking technique very briefly, but we use this to navigate the arpeggio. And to anyone who's new to this style of picking or mainly familiar with alternate picking, things are going to feel very odd using this kind of technique. So it's worth actually dedicating a full exercise just to get used to it. So let's have a run through the exercise, firstly as the quavers and then secondly as the semi-quavers. So to start with, you want to pay really close attention to the pick and direction indicators in this exercise, particularly for the consecutive upstrokes, because that's the economy picking technique that we use. Now, the first few notes actually follow an alternate picking pattern on the inside of the first and second string, like this. So that's down, up. Then this is followed by the consecutive upstrokes or the economy picking section, and that goes like this. So that's up, up. After which it reverts back to an alternate picking pattern on the second string, like this. So that's down, up. So altogether we have down, up, down, up, 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 down, up. And once again that's down, up, down, up, 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 down, up. So the reason for this specific picking method being used is to minimise the amount of movement needed by the right hand, and also to avoid jumping over the strings in order to pick them, which risks accidentally hitting the string on the way, makes things sound really clunky and a lot less clear, and that's much more likely to happen if we were using alternate picking. So for example, if I actually play this exercise using alternate picking, you'll see how much work the right hand actually has to do. See, a lot of work, a lot of movement, lots of jumping about, a few clunky notes in there as well when I'm kind of grazing over the string to come back down and pick it on a downstroke rather than just hitting it on an upstroke. But then if we compare it to economy picking, you see, much less work. And another thing to point out in this exercise is that when playing the consecutive upstrokes, make sure you use an upward pick slant. So as I described the downward pick slant earlier, apply the same principles but basically in reverse. It is going to require some practice to get used to this, as you'll be changing the angle of your pick midway through this lick as you saw, which, as I said before, is going to feel quite strange to people who are unfamiliar with this kind of picking approach. So make sure you're practicing it really slowly as quavers to start with, and then get used to the movement and the changing of the picking angle, and then gradually build up to the semiquavers. You should actually find this exercise a great little introduction to the overall feeling of economy picking, and then once you get it down, you'll actually also find it's a lot of fun to play, and especially when you add the rest of the phrase, it gets even more fun. So then the next section follows quickly on from the previous section, and in some ways is actually more of a continuation and conclusion from the previous section, but for the purpose of this segment we're going to treat it as a completely separate section of music, especially since it uses a different set of techniques and a different style of phrasing. So let's have a listen to this section now and hear how it sounds before we start breaking it down. So we start with this descending E flat major 7 arpeggio that employs this nice little trick of repeating the note that we pull off to by playing it on the string below but further up the fret. So for example, the first few notes start with D that pulls off to B flat. Then we grab the same B flat note but on the 13th fret on the second string. So you see those two notes are the same. So then we follow this pattern a little further down the arpeggio, moving from B flat to G, then G to E flat. Then we break away from the pattern a little bit and we don't repeat the note we pull off to, but instead we move one step down the arpeggio and to a D and then pull off to B flat. So that's like this. So altogether we have D to B flat, B flat to G, G to E flat, then D to B flat. Then we finish the phrase with a little hammer on to the keynote C, followed by an upstroke to G, which is the 5th degree of the scale, then a downstroke to a G flat, which is the flat 5, Now, altogether that sounds like this. And this is actually a bit of a standout moment in the song where we have both the G and the G flat ringing out together in quite a jarring semitone clash. And the reason this works well is because the chords underneath follow a similar progression to support it, and also because it resolves itself fairly quickly. Now, in order to get this sounding right, you need to make sure you have plenty of clearance between your little finger and the second string, so you don't end up blocking that second string. It's the same way that we had to have plenty of clearance between these two notes in the previous segment. So this way you'll hear both notes ringing out nice and clearly. And then if you want to really emphasize this sound, try striking both notes together at the end of the phrase like this, instead of. So then we finish this section off with a little bend and release phrase that repeats twice, with the second time being varied via a nice little pinched harmonic. So that sounds like this. Now, to get this pinch harmonic right, you're going to need to experiment a little bit on your own guitar to find out exactly where it is, as each guitar is different. Some have 22 frets, some have 24, some have different scale lengths. So it's going to require a bit of experimentation on your end to find exactly where it is. For me, on this guitar, I'm actually catching it just above the edge of my neck pickup, so just about here. Now, the harmonic that we're actually trying to pinch is actually 1 octave and a fifth above the note that we're holding down. So we can then use that to identify the sound of it, and then that will help you figure out where it is on your guitar. So here we have the first note that we're actually playing. So that's on the 12th fret on the 3rd string. And then the octave harmonic above that is above the 24th fret if you've got a 24th fret guitar, so that will be here. And then the note that we're actually looking for, the harmonic that we're looking for, is an octave and a fifth above the note we're holding down, so that ends up being here. So that's what it sounds like. So now you can hear that, you can kind of identify what it sounds like, and it'll help you to sort of find out where it is on your own guitar. But then once you actually pitch it, it sounds a lot better. So hopefully that'll help you find out where it is on your guitar and get the right place to pinch it to get it sounding right. So let's just recap everything in that previous section just to hear it all together. So one final note on this whole segment of the tutorial and how it flows from the string skipping lick all the way through to the last part we just covered, pretty much without stopping for so much as a breath. Now it's quite a big section of music to take on in one go and with some pretty tricky techniques, so when approaching learning this section, try breaking it up into smaller chunks like I've done in this segment. See, this is going to help make it a lot easier to learn, especially if it seems a little bit daunting. And it's also something you can then apply to learning any song really, no matter how long or how complex it is. So let's move on to the next segment where we'll take a look at the second half of this main solo section.